This day in sports history. It's June 9th, and on this day in 1993, the Montreal Canadiens won the Stanley Cup. Little did anybody know when they hoisted it in the air that night that it would be the last time a Canadian team would win it for 32 years and counting. On this night, it was Game 5 between the Canadiens and the Los Angeles Kings at the Montreal Forum. And while this would ultimately be the final game in the series, most hockey folks point to what happened in Game 2 back on the 3rd to being the turning point in this series. In that game, the Kings led 2-1 with less than 2 to play in regulation. During a stoppage, Montreal coach Jacques Demers requested for the officials to check Marty McSorley's stick, sensing it was illegal.
Right now, we're going to have a measurement of a King stick. It's the stick of Marty McSorley. The curve in a stick can only be 1/2 inch. And you see the instrument the referee uses right there. It's a gauge used. And if it's over, a minor penalty will be called against the LA Kings.
But if it's not, a minor penalty will be called against Montreal for delay of the game. We have 1:45 left. If the stick is legal, the penalty goes to Montreal.
Bob, I think that stick is illegal. It took no time for the referee, Kerry Fraser, to make the call.
Oh, and it was illegal. There were questions asked after the game about how Demers knew which stick to challenge, and it really depends on who you want to believe. The conspiracy theory goes that a Montreal Forum employee who had access to the Kings locker room moved the LA stick rack earlier in the day to a place that Montreal coaches could check them themselves. Demers poured water on that theory, saying that Guy Carbonneau was the eagle eye who noticed McSorley's overly curved blade. So now on the power play, the Canadiens pulled goalie Patrick Roy to give them a 2-man advantage, and it paid off.
Desjardins to Schneider, to Desjardins, Desjardins, right side. Here is Damphousse to Desjardins, shoots, score!
That sent the game into overtime, and Desjardins scored his 3rd of the night to win it. The Kings never led again in the series. Game 5 was a bit of an anomaly for the Canadiens in that it only lasted 60 minutes. 11 of their 20 postseason games went to overtime, with Montreal winning 10 of those 11. And they got on the board in the first period with a goal by Paul DiPietro.
Here's a steal. Lehman winding up. Lehman centered it. Score! DiPietro scores on a LA giveaway.
McSorley tied the game in the second with what I can only assume was a legal stick blade, but that was it for the Kings. The Canadiens scored 2 in the second, and then DiPietro scored his 2nd of the night in the 3rd to make it a 4-1 win for Montreal. Their 11 overtime games and 10 wins in sudden death are still the most for the playoffs, and it's not really close. 4 teams have won 7 OT playoff games, with the most recent being the 2023 Florida Panthers. The first 2 games in this year's Stanley Cup Finals have required extra periods, but neither the Oilers or the Panthers will approach the Canadiens' numbers. And while the Canadiens' success in sudden death games is remarkable, the fact that an NHL team from Canada has not won a Stanley Cup since feels even more astonishing. Of course, with Edmonton in the Stanley Cup Finals again, they have a chance to end that drought. The series is tied at a game apiece, with Game 3 tonight. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. I'm a big fan of shave soap. I've been using different brands for years, and I recently gave Sterling's shave soaps a try, and I've been very happy with the results. Sterling's shave soaps give you a great lather and a frictionless feel that allows the razor to glide right over the skin for a super close shave. No skin irritation and a clean, refreshing feel with no soapy residue after. I can tell you without a doubt, it's simply the best shave I've ever had. And my wife has noticed too. And here's the thing. With the ability to purchase 1-ounce sample pucks, you can try out different scents to find the right one for you. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com. That's STIRLING soap.com. On this day in 1946, Ted Williams hit one of the longest balls ever hit at Fenway Park. The Red Sox were wrapping up a 3-game series with Detroit with a doubleheader on this Sunday afternoon. The Sox were in the midst of a nice little winning streak, taking 9 of their last 10, with the lone blemish actually an 8-8 tie. Ted Williams walked up to the plate in the bottom of the first inning with 1 on and 1 out to face the Tigers' Fred Hutchinson. Hutchinson grooved a fastball that Williams turned on and drove deep to right. Joe Boucher was visiting Boston that day from Albany, New York. Now, Boucher was a bit of a ball magnet. He'd been to a few Red Sox games before, but his previous visits to the ballpark had been a bit perilous. Twice he'd nearly been hit by a baseball flying into the stands, and when he came to the park on this day, he'd purchased a ticket in Section 42 in the right field bleachers. He had been assured nobody had ever hit a ball that far and into that area of the stadium before, and so he'd purchased seat 21 in row 37 of Section 42. When the ball that Williams had struck with such a mighty force crashed through his straw hat and bonked him on the head, he simply could not believe it. He couldn't get far enough away from the baseball, apparently. He didn't bother scrambling for the ball either, that came to rest at his feet, and immediately lost interest in the game. Williams rounded the bases after his 2-run mighty blast. Boucher headed for the exit. The ball that Williams hit traveled 502 feet. The blast had been awe-inspiring in the moment, but it wasn't seen as anything super special until many years later. In 1984, nearly 40 years after Williams launched the ball into the mesosphere, the owner of the Red Sox at that point, Haywood Sullivan, installed a red back to the seat to commemorate the event. So next time you're at Fenway and you have a moment before or after the game, check out the lone red seat in Section 42, row 37. Okay, how about a little news of the weird? On this day in 1999, New York Mets manager Bobby Valentine went full-on undercover boss. But it wasn't to fool his employees. This was a game between the Mets and the Toronto Blue Jays at Shea Stadium. It was the top of the 12th inning with the game tied at 3. The Jays' Shannon Stewart was on first, and he was a threat to steal. So the Mets called a pitch out. Stewart did go, and Mets catcher Mike Piazza stepped out early and then took 2 steps into the field of play to receive the pitch and throw down to second. Stewart was safe. Despite no contact, though, the umpire ruled Piazza had interfered with a batter, called a catcher's balk, and awarded the hitter first base. Now, Valentine came out to argue the call, and he got tossed from the game. Typically, when a manager gets thrown out, they'll hang out in the tunnel and relay orders to an assistant. But that's not what Valentine did. Instead, he changed out of his Mets uniform, put on a Mets t-shirt, made a fake mustache out of eye black tape, put on a pair of sunglasses, and he came back to the bench. That's not allowed. Once you're tossed, you gotta make yourself scarce. The disguise worked on the umpires, and the Mets won the game in 14 innings. But cameras quickly spotted the incognito Valentine. When confronted with the pictures by the media, Valentine pulled the old Shaggy defense of, "It wasn't me." The league office did not find the stunt very amusing and fined him $5,000 and suspended him for 2 games. On this day in 1973, Secretariat became the first horse in 25 years to win the Triple Crown, and the colt did it in impressive fashion. Jockey Ron Turcotte barely had to prod the horse nicknamed Big Red around the track. Secretariat took off like a lightning bolt from the gate and with every gallop pulled away from the field. Sham was the only horse that challenged him that day, but at the 3/4 pole, Secretariat took off and left no doubt in the eyes of the 69,000 who watched it live that day at Belmont Park. He ran the 1.5 miles in a record 2 minutes 24 seconds and won by an astounding 31 lengths. The time and margin of victory are still the records for the Belmont Stakes. And with the U.S. Open getting started this week at Oakmont, let's go back to what happened on this day in 1919, when golfer Willie Chisholm had a rather unfortunate experience in his round at the U.S. Open. The Open was being played that year at Brayburn Country Club in West Newton, Massachusetts. Chisholm was playing in the opening round, and when he hit his tee shot at the par 3 8th hole, he chunked it into a rocky ravine. But instead of taking an unplayable lie, he decided to make it playable, climbing down into the gulch, hacking at it with his wee niblick. It took him 14 shots to get it out and onto the green. He then 3-putted for an 18. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. Well, you probably know that YouTube did not start out to be the preeminent place to share your videos. But did you know that the original concept for what eventually became YouTube was an online dating service with the tagline, "Tune in, hook up"? Yeah, it didn't take off, obviously, but inspired by Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction at Super Bowl 38 and the inability to find video of the incident, the guys behind YouTube made the pivot to what it has become. The first video uploaded to the new YouTube concept by one of its founders was called Me at the Zoo. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.